On the day we were supposed to sign our company's Series B funding deal, Sophia walked into the boardroom wearing a blood-red dress and holding hands with Ryan, the very investor who was backing our expansion. I stood frozen at the head of the table, the signed documents laid out in front of me, while 30 staff members waited for my signal to move forward. Sophia leaned down beside me, her perfume cutting through the sterile corporate air. "I'm taking the offer, and him," she whispered, flashing that smile she once saved for pitch decks and dinner dates. She didn't even wait for my response, just turned, heels echoing against the marble, and walked out with Ryan at her side. There was no dramatic pause, no tension-building music like in the movies, just stunned silence. Then the room erupted, voices of confusion, anger, betrayal. Questions I couldn't answer, calls from lawyers, alerts from banks, notifications from our app infrastructure team that our funding line had been pulled in real time. One of the engineers looked at me, almost pleading. "John, what do we do now?" I didn't have an answer, not yet. Sophia hadn't just walked out of a company, she'd walked out of me. She had been my girlfriend, my business partner, and for years, the one person who knew the hours I poured into code, the sleepless nights balancing budgets, and the late-night walks we took when the pressure got too much. It wasn't just betrayal, it was disassembly. The ripping apart of everything we built, together. Ryan, the charming, Rolex-wearing VC with too much cologne and too little ethics, had shown interest in our company 3 months ago. I should have seen it coming. The way Sophia started dressing sharper, coming in earlier, laughing louder at his jokes during meetings. She had ambition, no doubt, but I thought we shared the same vision: build slow, build clean, stay in control. Clearly, I was wrong. By the end of the day, I was removed from all company systems. Sophia's legal team sent over a clause I hadn't noticed, something she'd quietly pushed into a restructuring agreement months back. In the rush of product launches and investor meetings, I hadn't checked the fine print. She did. That night, I walked through our now empty co-working space alone. Desks were half cleared, my whiteboard with future roadmap ideas still had Sophia's handwriting across it. Phase 3, International Launch, it read. I stood in front of it for a long time, then picked up the marker and wiped it clean. I went home, opened the drawer where I kept my first sketchpad, the one from college, before I met her, and sat at the kitchen counter. Page by page, I redrew the product I'd originally envisioned, not what we built together, but what I wanted to build before I knew what compromise looked like. The next morning, Deborah showed up at my door. She had been our operations lead, quiet, methodical, always overlooked. She didn't say much, just handed me a flash drive. "You're going to need this," she said, "and I don't trust them with my resignation letter yet, so consider this unofficial." I plugged it in. Full export of financials, code snapshots. A time-stamped video showing Ryan and Sophia in a side meeting 2 weeks ago, discussing the Series B bait and switch. I looked at Deborah, stunned. She simply shrugged. I believed in what we were doing, what you were doing, not what she turned it into. That was the beginning. In the weeks that followed, I moved out of the apartment Sophia and I once shared, set up a makeshift workspace in my cousin's garage, and started again. With no seed money, no employees, no brand, just code and clarity. Sophia's betrayal had taken everything from me, except the part she could never touch: my mind, my vision, my silence. While she courted media attention, parading around with Ryan and announcing bold pivots that made headlines but no sense, I stayed quiet. I didn't comment, I didn't post, I didn't retaliate. I built it. Deborah joined me fully after 3 weeks. She said nothing about the past, just brought coffee and focus. We started with nothing and designed everything from the ground up again. A better backend, cleaner UI, new branding. One night, as we were watching logs update in real time, Deborah looked at me. "Do you think they know?" "Know what?" I asked. "That you're not trying to beat them." I looked up. "I'm not. I'm just making sure they're not the last version of me the world remembers." She didn't say anything after that, but her smile told me everything. I wasn't broken. I was just beginning. John was 30, but the weight in his eyes made him look older. Years of quiet endurance tend to etch themselves into a man's expression, especially when the scars are not physical but personal. He had the kind of mind that was both methodical and visionary, a rare combination in a world obsessed with shortcuts. From his early 20s, John had been consumed with the dream of building something that actually solved problems, not just profited from them. His obsession had a name, Nuvetch, a platform designed to help users track mental wellness through behavioral analytics and personalized adaptive routines. And he hadn't built it alone. Sophia had been beside him from the beginning, at least, that's what he used to believe. Sophia was 28, the kind of woman who turned heads and held attention long after the turning. Her laugh was precise, her wardrobe effortless, her presence magnetic. When she and John met in a graduate-level machine learning course, she hadn't known a single line of Python. But what she lacked in code, she made up for in charisma. She could walk into a room of investors and walk out with half of them offering funding without showing a single feature. John had admired her. He still remembered the first time she smiled at him over a stale coffee and said, "You focus on the back end, I'll handle the rest." They made a good team, at least on the surface. John built, Sophia promoted. The late nights in his small apartment, surrounded by energy drink cans and whiteboard scrolls, turned into demos, pitches, and traction. Their garage startup moved into a downtown co-working space, then their own leased office. Sophia would call it ours, John started calling it home. But somewhere along the way, the rhythm changed. At first, it was subtle. Sophia no longer attended the back-end sync meetings. Then she started pushing back on John's hesitations about monetization. "Just anonymize the user data," she said. "Everyone does it." But John didn't want to be like everyone. He wanted to build with integrity. Then came Ryan. Ryan was a venture capitalist with a grin sharp enough to slice through contracts. He wore his ambition in his cologne and his ego in his pocket square. Sophia met him at a panel where Nuvetch was being featured as a startup to watch. Ryan took notice, not of the software, but of Sophia. Within weeks, he was offering seed capital to expand reach and enhance visibility. John didn't trust him. "He's not investing in the platform," John told Sophia one night. "He's investing in you." Sophia had laughed. "So what? Let him. As long as the company benefits, what's the harm?" But the harm came fast. Sophia began taking investor meetings without John. Feature priorities changed to what Ryan's advisory board said would look better in demos. John's core system, rooted in personalized integrity, was being reshaped to serve generic, flashier use cases. When John pushed back, Sophia called him paranoid. "You're too attached, that's why we need perspective." Then came the clause. Buried in a secondary agreement tied to company restructuring, it altered voting rights and ownership shares. It passed with a board majority, thanks to new appointees Ryan brought in. John didn't realize the full damage until it was too late. And when he walked into that boardroom expecting to close the Series B deal, he was greeted by Sophia, in red, holding Ryan's hand. "I'm taking the offer, and him." She had said it like a punchline, but the silence that followed wasn't laughter, it was collapse. The irony was that in those final days at Nuvetch, as ever, everything he built crumbled around him. The one person who kept showing up wasn't Sophia or any of the smiling board members. It was Deborah. Deborah had joined the company as an intern 2 years earlier. Smart, quiet, always early. She never vied for attention, never tried to outshine. She watched everything, and when she spoke, it was only when necessary. Most people underestimated her, assuming her silence meant simplicity. John never did. He noticed how her data models were always clean, her ops reports thorough. On the day after Sophia's walkout, when John's access to company servers was revoked and his email was locked, Deborah showed up at his door with a flash drive. "You're going to need this," she said. Her expression didn't carry pity, just calm certainty. When John asked why she was doing this, she only replied, "Because I know who built the system, and I know who broke it." Deborah became more than a former intern, she became the stabilizing force in John's unraveling. While Sophia and Ryan dominated headlines with flashy rebranding and global announcements, Deborah and John sat across each other on a fold-out table in a dusty garage, rebuilding what mattered, not what looked good, but what worked. John no longer needed someone to speak for him. He had learned, through pain, that the world listens best when you have results. Deborah didn't need praise, she needed purpose. Together, they started again, not Nuvetch 2.0, but something better. Something untied from performance and press releases, something with roots. John had always been the visionary, but now he was also the strategist. Every line of code was personal, every decision deliberate, every delay a lesson from the past. He no longer rushed to ship or begged for validation. And with Deborah beside him, not in front, not behind, but beside, they began building not just a platform, but a foundation. Meanwhile, Sophia basked in artificial spotlight. She appeared on podcast interviews, wearing designer confidence, citing statistics she didn't fully understand. She praised innovation she no longer had any role in. Ryan kept feeding her headlines, but insiders in the tech world began to notice the updates were slowing, bugs weren't getting fixed, user trust was declining. When an investigative tech blog published a piece questioning Nuvetch's data policies, Sophia dismissed it. Just noise, she told Ryan. But the silence coming from John's side of the world, that wasn't noise, that was traction. A new platform, codenamed Veritas, began making quiet waves, no marketing, no launch hype, just small beta groups and overwhelming praise. John didn't mention Sophia in interviews, he didn't drag Ryan in tech circles, he simply built, and Deborah handled the rest, team hiring, server ops, quiet investor interest. This time, John read every clause in every contract, twice. He didn't need revenge, he didn't want noise. He wanted clarity, ownership, peace. He wanted to prove, not to Sophia, not even to the world, but to himself, that he could build without being betrayed. That he could trust again. That he could choose someone like Deborah and not mistake silence for weakness. John had once believed Sophia was irreplaceable, but the truth was, people like Sophia are everywhere. People like Deborah, they're the rarest kind. And as the final pieces of Veritas came together, John realized something. He didn't just survive Sophia's betrayal. He redefined Ned who he was because of it. John stood silently in the hallway outside the conference room, his ID badge still clipped to his collar, even though it no longer worked. Moments ago, he had been escorted out of his own company by private security, hired under a motion Sophia pushed through in his absence. The irony was cruel, the startup he had founded, funded and sacrificed years of his life for now treated him like a trespasser. The official reason was emotional instability and a pattern of erratic behavior. Sophia, backed by the board Ryan assembled, had voted to suspend him as CEO, citing concerns for the company's future. But John knew what this really was. It was a coup, packaged in corporate language, and it had been building for months. It started with minor things, decisions made without his input, budget reallocations he wasn't informed of, investor meetings moved to times he wasn't invited to. Ryan had slowly filled the advisory team with his own people, former colleagues, mutual friends, and a lawyer or two he conveniently recommended. Sophia handled it all with surgical precision. In meetings, she smiled. In emails, she CC'd. In press releases, she called John our visionary founder, even as she quietly pulled him away from every real decision. John had known something was wrong when the HR head, a woman he'd personally hired, couldn't meet his eyes during the performance wellness review. Concerns have been raised about your judgment, she'd said, particularly your reluctance to act decisively in scaling opportunities. Translation: he'd refused to sell out their users' behavioral data for marketing dollars. Now, locked out of his own servers, John walked to the parking lot with no company, no office, and no clear plan. He drove home, sat on the floor of his living room, and stared at the blank white wall for hours. His phone buzzed non-stop, alerts, questions, legal threats, gossip. He let them ring. What hurt wasn't the company, it was Sophia. He had trusted her, loved her, shared code, meals, secrets, and dreams with her. They built a future on napkins and ramen nights. And now, she was walking red carpets with Ryan, announcing Nuvetch's bold reinvention, while smiling into cameras and holding launch parties for features John had personally designed. Within weeks, every mention of him vanished. The About page removed his name. Old interviews were re-edited. New ones cast Sophia as the sole innovator. Ryan, of course, was labeled the strategic architect. Deborah texted once, "I don't know what to say. I saw what happened. I'm sorry." John never replied. Instead, he disappeared. He deleted his social media, changed phone numbers, even moved cities. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't building anything. He took up running, painted in silence, read books unrelated to tech. Some days, he didn't speak at all. The pain wasn't loud, it was quiet, slow, and corrosive, but within it, something grew, not bitterness, not revenge. Focus. 1 year passed. Nuvetch reached its peak. Or so it seemed. Sophia and Ryan toured globally, pitching themselves as pioneers in ethical AI. Their version of the platform ballooned in size but shrank in depth. Glitches multiplied, users complained, the algorithm became more exploitative than predictive. But with the right PR, none of it mattered, until real consequences emerged. Then, without warning, something new appeared. Veritas. A sleek, efficient platform launched silently with a limited beta and no known founder. It spread fast, especially among users disillusioned by Nuvetch. Its features were stunning. Hyper-personalized insights, clean UI, unmatched stability, and above all, no invasive data harvesting. Blogs called it mysterious, possibly ex-Nuvetch talent, and an antidote to current platforms. Sophia dismissed it publicly. Every cycle has its copycats, she said during a live stream. But in private, Ryan was furious. How the hell are they scaling this fast? When the tech reporters dug deeper, they found an LLC registered to an anonymous trust. But engineers across the industry whispered the same name, John. And they were right. John had spent the past year learning everything Sophia and Ryan thought he didn't understand. Business law, fundraising loopholes, infrastructure scaling. He studied the patterns that led to his downfall, not to blame, but to outmaneuver. And he built Veritas, not with a loud launch, but with deliberate silence, no VC money, no media blitz, just product. And beside him, the entire time was Deborah. She had quit Nuvetch 3 months after John was ousted, quietly, without drama, packed her desk, ignored Sophia's shocked face, and walked out. John had reached out a week later. "I'm starting something," he said. She replied with 2 words, "I'm in." From there, the two rebuilt, line by line. Deborah handled architecture and scale, John handled algorithmic personalization. They operated out of a rented warehouse with borrowed hardware and zero press. Their core rule: no shortcuts, no headlines, just results. While Sophia chased expansion, John perfected precision. While Ryan posed for magazines, Deborah negotiated quiet vendor partnerships that made Veritas bulletproof from the start. By the time Nuvetch announced its IPO, Veritas already had 300,000 active users and growing. But the real blow came the night before Sophia was scheduled to ring the Nasdaq bell. A feature-for-feature breakdown comparison of Veritas versus Nuvetch went viral. Reddit, Hacker News, LinkedIn, everywhere. The result was humiliating. Veritas outperformed Nuvetch in every category: faster loading, cleaner analytics, better user retention, no monetized tracking. And at the center of it all, John's design philosophy, now executed perfectly. Sophia didn't sleep that night. Ryan stormed through emails, legal teams scrambled. "Find out who's behind this," Ryan barked. They did. And when they saw the name, John Holloway, tied to Veritas's US trademark registration, Sophia froze. She had erased him. But he came back. Not with noise. With silence, precision, and undeniable superiority. John wasn't out for revenge. He was out for clarity. There were nights when John couldn't sleep, not from fear, not from anxiety, but from an ache that refused to leave. Some betrayals cut loud and fast, like a gunshot. But Sophia's betrayal had been quiet, drawn out, methodical, like bleeding from a place you didn't realize was wounded. He would wake at 3:17 a.m., staring at the cracked ceiling of the rented loft they'd converted into Veritas's temporary workspace. The hum of servers in the corner, the pale light from Deborah's screen still on the other side of the room. It was all too quiet for a man whose mind refused to stop replaying everything. He didn't want to hate Sophia, that would have been too easy. What he felt was worse: confusion, guilt, anger. And something else, the hollowing dread of self-doubt. Was it really betrayal, or had he failed to see what she needed? Had he been too idealistic, too naive, too in love with the idea of building something good to realize she had stopped believing in good a long time ago? John didn't speak of these thoughts aloud, not even to Deborah. He buried them beneath line after line of code. Every module in Veritas was an answer to a moment he'd once hesitated. Every optimization was a response to the things Sophia said he was too slow to deliver. Every clean UX decision was made with the ghost of her voice whispering what users want to see. It was his therapy, his revenge, his redemption, but it was also eating him alive. Deborah noticed. She didn't confront him the first time he snapped at a minor bug, or when he threw his phone across the room after another press article glamorizing Sophia's latest innovation. But she noticed. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't with anger. It was in the middle of a quiet night as they sat opposite each other, staring at a broken pipeline that neither of them had the energy to fix anymore. "You're not here to prove her wrong," she said. Her voice was soft, almost like she was reminding herself too. "You're here to prove yourself right." John looked up, caught off guard. "What?" Deborah held his gaze. "You keep coding like you're answering her, building like she's the one you need to convince, but Sophia's not watching you anymore, John. You are." He didn't respond. But those words burrowed in deeper than any insult Sophia had ever thrown at him. That night, John didn't touch his keyboard. He just sat. In silence. The next morning, Deborah brewed 2 cups of strong coffee and placed one next to him. She didn't ask how he slept, she didn't ask if he was okay, she just opened the dev board and began assigning tasks. John followed her lead. They settled into a new rhythm, not of avoidance, but of healing. They worked day and night, but something had shifted. John no longer raced to outdo Sophia's press cycles, he no longer checked the news every hour, he focused instead on delivering the product that had always been in his heart, before the pitch decks, before the investors, before the red dresses and fake smiles. And Deborah was there through it all. Her presence was grounding, like an anchor in a storm that never stopped. She asked the right questions at the right time. She called him out when he tunnel visioned too deep into an algorithm. She knew when to push and when to pause. Slowly, John began to realize that he wasn't just working with an old colleague. He was trusting someone again. One night, as they sat shoulder to shoulder debugging the analytics module, their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same wireframe tablet. They froze. John looked at her. Deborah didn't look away. Neither of them said anything, and yet everything shifted in that moment. There was no confession, no awkward withdrawal, just a silent acknowledgement of something that had been growing unnoticed between late nights and long silences. A kind of connection Sophia never gave him. Trust without performance, support without showmanship. Meanwhile, Sophia's whirl D was unraveling, and John saw it not from press releases but from the cracks between the headlines. Her interviews became more erratic, she contradicted herself. Promised features Nuvetch's dev team couldn't deliver. Users started leaking internal bugs. Analysts began to question the company's burn rate. But Sophia doubled down on the facade. She threw galas, launched partnerships, danced with Ryan on stage at tech festivals while speaking about female-led innovation, as if she had built anything more than a persona. John didn't feel satisfaction. He felt something worse. Pity. He knew Sophia better than the world ever would. Knew how much of her public confidence was armor, knew that her greatest fear was being irrelevant. But you can't build relevance on deception forever. Ryan, of course, was nowhere to be found once things turned sour. John watched from afar as Sophia posted videos to defend herself, her voice still measured but her eyes more desperate than convincing. He closed the browser and got back to work. Deborah didn't mention Sophia anymore, not unless John did. One morning, she showed him a chart. User growth was spiking, churn was down, conversion was up. Veritas wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. John stared at the data, emotion rising unexpectedly in his throat. Deborah touched his wrist. "This is yours, you did this." He looked at her. "No," he said. "We did." And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel proud. Not because Sophia had fallen, but because he hadn't. Because despite it all, he didn't become her. He didn't let bitterness define the product. He didn't build a platform out of spite. He built it out of vision. And when Veritas passed Nuvetch in user count, John didn't throw a party. He quietly took the day off and drove to the beach. Deborah went with him. They didn't talk about work, they just sat, toes in the sand, watching the tide erase every footprint. And when the sun set, Deborah turned to him and said, "You don't owe her anything, not even anger." John nodded. "I know," he whispered. He had finally let go. The ballroom of the Horizon Tech Global Summit was soaked in blue light. The stage spanned 50 feet, flanked by two massive LED panels that cycled through brand logos and speaker bios. Hundreds of executives, investors, engineers, and media representatives had gathered in the hall. It was the final keynote of the summit and the most anticipated. Sophia's name had been printed in gold across the event brochure for weeks. Sophia Hale, co-founder of Nuvetch, reinventing the future of AI wellness. Below her name, keynote speaker, closing night. She arrived in a tailored white suit, flanked by assistants, her walk steady and rehearsed. Cameras clicked. Phones rose to capture her entrance. She wore a smile, measured, practiced, unshaken. Behind her, Ryan adjusted his jacket, nodding to sponsors and shaking hands with camera crews. His grin was wider than ever. He loved this part, loved being seen. Sophia took a final breath before heading backstage, where event staff prepared her mic and adjusted lighting cues. Her speech had been reviewed 10 times, every data point carefully arranged, every phrase engineered to stir confidence. She was ready, until the crowd began to stir. It started as a ripple, a few murmurs in the front row. Then phones began lighting up. Faces turned toward screens instead of the stage. One man let out a whistle, another woman in the press section gasped. "Wait, is that real?" Sophia's eyes darted toward one of the screens behind the audience, which now flashed a push notification from TechWire. Breaking, Veritas announces global partnership with TerraCore Health Systems. The AI wellness startup now has exclusive access to over 2.1 billion health data points across 12 countries. Sophia's heart dropped. The name Veritas glared back at her, and underneath it, founder CEO, John Holloway. The room erupted, not loudly but in a wave of buzzing phones, whispered disbelief, and shifted energy. Her moment, the crescendo of her year, was slipping. Ryan leaned over to a nearby staffer. "What the hell is TerraCore doing signing with that nobody? Call their board, now." Sophia turned toward him, seeking some kind of assurance, but Ryan was already stepping back, subtly distancing himself as if he were just another spectator. She blinked, straightened her jacket, nodded at the coordinator. The cue was given, the lights went down, music rose, her name echoed through the hall, and she walked on stage. Cameras still clicked, polite applause rippled, but something had changed. She could feel it in the audience's eyes. She smiled anyway. "Good evening," she began, her voice strong through the mic. "I'm honored to close this year's summit with a look into how Nuvetch is changing the AI wellness landscape." But she could see it now, rows of faces barely listening, screens glowing on laps, live blogs updating in real time. The whispers didn't stop, the tension didn't fade. And then, midway through her first slide, the back door of the ballroom opened. Heads turned. A figure stepped in. John. Wearing a black jacket over a clean white shirt, no logo, no entourage, just presence. He didn't walk to the stage, he didn't wave, he simply moved along the side aisle, quiet, composed, eyes locked on the presentation. Sophia saw him, her voice caught, but she covered it with a sip of water. He didn't look at her, not yet. She continued, forcing words out as the screen behind her now betrayed her. Live, trend, #Veritas, leap, trending in 18 countries, her hands clenched slightly at her sides. She rushed the rest of the talk, data points blurred together, jokes fell flat. She skipped 2 slides and ended 10 minutes early. Polite claps followed, but it was empty, the moment was gone. Backstage, she pulled off her mic with trembling hands. Ryan was gone. Her assistant approached, pale. We need to talk. The press is." "I know," Sophia snapped. "Not now." In the green room, she sat on the velvet couch, staring at the floor. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Investor group requesting urgent call, journalist requesting official response on TerraCore deal, Ryan. Unavailable. She tapped a video that had just been posted. AAS. ID-by-side comparison of Veritas and Nuvetch. Veritas wasn't just competing, it was obliterating. John's name was everywhere, The partnership with TerraCore was a direct assault, access to institutional-scale wellness data, something Nuvetch had been trying to secure for 2 years. Now exclusive to John. Sophia covered her mouth. How had she missed it? How had he moved so quietly, so completely, while she chased magazine covers? She had erased him. But he hadn't disappeared, he'd just evolved. And then, her phone buzzed again. A photo, taken seconds earlier. John, shaking hands with TerraCore's global CEO on the floor of the summit. No press announcement, no speech, just presence. He didn't need to stand on a stage. He owned the floor beneath it. And just like that, the story had shifted. Nuvetch was no longer the leader, it was the reminder. The platform that could have been. Sophia sat alone in that green room, surrounded by carefully arranged flowers and untouched champagne, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Irrelevance. Outside, the summit buzzed, not about her, but about him. Deborah had posted Veritas's mission statement minutes after the announcement. It read, "We didn't come to disrupt, we came to realign." There was no mention of Nuvetch, no shots at Sophia, no bitterness, just a simple truth. Sophia stood slowly, walked to the mirror, and stared at her reflection. She still looked composed, still wore the outfit designed for power, but she knew, everyone knew, John had arrived, and he hadn't said a single word. The second day of the Horizon Tech Summit was different. The press buzz hadn't died down since Veritas's TerraCore announcement, and now every panel was packed, cameras poised not just for big reveals, but for fallout. The crowd that had politely applauded Sophia's keynote the night before was now filling a rival ballroom, the schedule showing a name that hadn't graced a conference stage in nearly 2 years. John Holloway, Silence, Systems, and the Future of Ethical AI. It wasn't a keynote, it wasn't on the main stage, but it didn't matter. People streamed into the smaller venue until it overflowed, the walls lined with analysts, reporters, even rival CEOs. There were whispers that Sophia herself had tried to cancel her remaining press interviews that morning. She hadn't succeeded. In the green room, John adjusted the collar of his shirt as Deborah handed him the last-minute notes. Not that he needed them. Every slide, every word, every figure in their deck was real, built, tested, and battle-ready. "Don't look at them," Deborah said calmly. "Look at the product. You didn't build Veritas for their validation." John nodded slowly. "I didn't build it for revenge either." Deborah smirked. "And that's exactly why it's working." They stepped onto the stage to polite clapping, until the live demo screen lit up. The mood changed instantly. John didn't open with words. Instead, he launched the Veritas dashboard and asked the audience to connect anonymously. With one click, Veritas pulled real-time anonymized feedback from hundreds of user profiles, instantly generating behavior. Rail trend predictions with 91% accuracy. No lag, no preloaded sample data, no staged actors. It was real and flawless. Then Deborah showed how Veritas handled scalability across markets, its zero data leak infrastructure verified by third-party ethical audits. There was a ripple of audible gasps. One engineer in the third row mouthed, "No way." Then came the comparisons. On one screen, Nuvetch's latest interface, on the other, Veritas, speed, clarity, user retention, all favoring John's side. The crowd didn't need commentary, they saw the truth themselves. Someone cheered, others followed. By the end of the 30-minute demo, the entire audience was clapping, not politely, but erupting in raw excitement. John stepped forward, eyes level, posture calm. One reporter in the front row stood up. "Mr. Holloway, given your history with Sophia Hale, and considering Veritas now directly threatens Nuvetch's market, do you have anything to say to your former co-founder?" The room stilled. John took the mic. He didn't look smug. He didn't hesitate. "Some things," he said quietly, "are better built without noise." The audience burst into applause. He stepped back, handed the mic to Deborah, and walked off stage. No long speeches, no gloating, just impact. But that wasn't the end. As John and Deborah walked through the backstage corridor, a producer rushed over, eyes wide. "You need to see this," he said, showing a breaking alert on his tablet. On the screen, a leaked video from 8 months ago. The footage showed Sophia in a closed-door investor meeting with two executives from a now-defunct accelerator. She was flipping through a pitch deck, her voice clear, confident, and damning. "This behavioral prediction engine," she said, pointing to the slide, "was entirely designed in-house. I led the prototype myself. The codebase is exclusive to us." But the code on the screen, it wasn't hers, it was John's. Older version identifiers, variable naming conventions, even his original modular structure, clear and undisputed. The leak spread like fire. Tech blogs reposted it within minutes. Analysts began dissecting it live on Twitter. Investors started withdrawing soft commitments for Nuvetch's IPO, and journalists at the summit updated their coverage midday with new headlines. Veritas CEO exposes truth while Nuvetch faces plagiarism scandal. Sophia Hale under fire for claiming former partner's work. Veritas isn't disrupting, it's replacing. At a nearby lounge, Sophia's team scrambled. Legal sent rushed PR statements claiming contextual misunderstanding, but the footage was too clean, too direct, too damning. Sophia sat silently at the head of her round table, her team's voices around her growing frantic. "She said it was rewritten. She told us it was original," someone muttered. A board member leaned in. "Why would you use code from a founder you ousted? You swore. He didn't leave anything useful behind." Sophia didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on a live ticker above the room's main display. Nuvetch IPO, delayed indefinitely, investor pullback, 27%, valuation drop in pre-market, Nasdaq sites, regulatory review concerns, and then came the final hit. Tech Times posted a side-by-side of Sophia's original exit press release, where she described John as a valuable but misaligned contributor, with the current Veritas partnership expansion. The headline read, "Turns out he wasn't misaligned, he was just misunderstood." Sophia walked out of the room, her heels echoed in the hallway. Reporters tried to stop her for a statement, she said nothing. Back at the Veritas booth, Deborah was shaking hands, answering questions, and guiding people through the final features of their beta app. She noticed John standing by the window, watching the summit unfold outside. She walked over, handing him a bottle of water. "You okay?" she asked. John nodded, though he wasn't smiling. "I thought it would feel different," he admitted. Deborah leaned on the railing beside him. "That's because you didn't do this to win against her. You did it to win back yourself." He looked at her, really looked. "Yeah," he said, "I did." And yet, part of him still felt the echo of that old pain, of rooms where he wasn't listened to, of boards that silenced him, of someone he once trusted rewriting his name out of every version of the company they built together. But that echo was fading now, drowned out by applause, by progress, by clarity. "Want to know the best part?" Deborah said, eyes twinkling. "What?" "We didn't leak the footage." John raised a brow. "Seriously?" She nodded. Someone else must have had a conscience, maybe one of the old engineers, maybe just someone tired of the noise. John laughed under his breath. "Poetic." Deborah shrugged. "Or karma." Later that evening, as the summit held its closing ceremony, Sophia was nowhere to be seen. Ryan had already left, flown back to New York, according to staff, distancing himself in true VC fashion. Meanwhile, John took no awards. He didn't walk the red carpet. He and Deborah simply packed their materials, confirmed server updates from their DevOps lead, and left quietly through a side exit. No headlines followed them. But the results did. By morning, Veritas had tripled its pre-registration numbers. Industry leaders reached out for partnerships. International press requested interviews. And Sophia? Her IPO was suspended. Regulatory bodies began inquiries. The board called for an emergency leadership review. In less than 24 hours, the company she stole had become a cautionary tale. And John? He simply returned to the product. Not for headlines, not for applause. But because now, he was free, free from the noise, the betrayal, the pain. He had rebuilt not just a platform, but himself. It happened on a Wednesday. No announcement, no press build-up, just a single message, buried between partnership requests and speaking invitations. From Sophia Hale, subject, talk? You wouldn't have made it without me, thought we should clear the A-site. John stared at it for a while, then clicked away. He didn't reply that day, or the next. It wasn't that he was afraid of what she might say, it was that her words no longer carried weight. The woman who once shared his whiteboards and pillow now felt like a relic of a life he'd long since debugged. But 3 days later, as he stepped out of Veritas HQ to get coffee, Sophia was there, in person. Waiting quietly by the lobby door, dressed in beige, makeup minimal for once, heels traded for flats. She looked smaller, somehow, not physically, but stripped of the armor she always wore in public. No entourage, no Ryan. John gave her a glance, unsure whether to keep walking, but after a pause, he stepped to the side and nodded once. They sat at a small table outside the cafe across the street. Sophia kept her sunglasses on for a moment, then removed them. Her eyes looked tired, not from a lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavy for too long. "You look different," she said. "So do you," John replied. She chuckled without humor. "I suppose we both had a version upgrade." There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. "You got everything," she said. "The product, the respect, the narrative." Her voice wasn't bitter, just resigned. John didn't speak. Sophia leaned in, voice low. "But you do know you wouldn't have made it without me, right? Not the version you are now. The calm, the precision, the silence. You learned that from me." John tilted his head slightly, then smiled, not sarcastically, almost sadly. "I didn't make it in spite of you," he said. "I made it because you showed me who I shouldn't be." She flinched, but said nothing. "I used to think we built something together," John continued, "but the truth is, I was building a product, you were building a persona, and I didn't see the difference soon enough." Sophia looked down. He stood up. "You taught me what a lie looks like in slow motion, and how to move before it spreads." She looked up again, eyes damp. "You hate me." "No," John said. "That would mean I still carry you. I don't." And then Deborah stepped out of the building. She had a phone in one hand, coffee in the other, her hair pulled back in a low bun, glasses reflecting the late morning sun. She saw Sophia, then John, and paused. Sophia's face tightened. Deborah walked forward slowly, unsure whether to interrupt. John turned, smiled warmly, and held out his hand. Deborah slipped hers into his without a word. Sophia watched as they walked away, hand in hand. She didn't call after him. She didn't cry. But something inside her shifted, finally admitting what she hadn't allowed herself to believe. She lost, not to John, to herself, and that would hurt longer than any market cap drop ever could. That afternoon, Veritas released its latest roadmap update to industry leaders, but the press didn't focus on the product specs. They focused on the announcement that followed. John and Deborah held a joint interview. Wasn't confirmed, the thread gained traction, corroborated by screenshots and time-stamped version histories. Ryan's team issued a vague legal threat, but it didn't matter. By morning, Ryan had pulled all remaining funding from Nuvetch, citing leadership inconsistency and brand volatility. Nuvetch's board issued a final press release stating a change in company direction, followed by Sophia's quiet resignation, buried at the bottom of a 5-paragraph statement. She disappeared from the tech circuit entirely. No follow-up interviews, no defense, just gone. Meanwhile, Veritas launched its mentorship arm. The platform that began as John's personal redemption now became a movement. Founders from underfunded sectors began joining, engineers looking for clean product spaces, medical analysts, behavioral economists, even retired regulators. Veritas was no longer just an app, it was a philosophy. And at the center of it stood two people who never set out to rule, just to build what they couldn't find. One evening, Deborah sat beside John on the rooftop balcony of the Veritas building. The city spread below them, lights blinking like fireflies in neat rows. "You've been quiet," she said. John looked out at the skyline. "I'm trying to hold on to this. Not the moment. The peace." Deborah smiled. "You're allowed to rest now." He turned to her. "Are we good stewards of this?" he asked. "Of all this power?" She nodded. "Because we never asked for it. That's how I know." John leaned back in his chair. "It's funny, I thought success would look like headlines, acquisitions, applause. And now? It looks like this." They sat in silence for a while. Just two people who survived betrayal, built something honest, and held on to each other, not because they needed saving, but because they were strong enough not to walk alone anymore. 6 months later, Veritas released a new feature called Legacy Mode, a user-customized archive that visualized how behavioral patterns evolve over time. It included a timeline, goals reached, setbacks learned from, decisions made and why. At the bottom, a single user-submitted field. Who shaped your clarity? For John, the answer wasn't Sophia, it was himself. And Deborah. And every silent night spent not retaliating, but refining. And every moment he chose to build instead of break. He submitted one word, integrity, and closed the tab. He didn't need to say more. The auditorium was quieter than expected, not silent, just still. A kind of breathless anticipation had settled over the room, as if every soul present understood that this wasn't just another product launch. This was something else. John stood at the center of the stage beneath the soft arc of the spotlight. The screen behind him displayed a single word, Origin, their new product, a tool designed not to predict behavior, but to help users trace it, to understand the origin of every habit, every decision, every success, and every failure. The data was theirs, unfiltered. No ads, no manipulation, just truth. As the first live demo concluded, John paused. He looked up at the audience, at hundreds of faces in rows, each expression expectant. But he wasn't really looking at them. His eyes traveled further, backward in time, somewhere deeper than memory. He saw it again, the red dress, the boardroom. Sophia's hand wrapped around Ryan's wrist as they exited the deal room like they owned the future. I'm taking the offer, and him. His mind had frozen for only a moment that day, but the impact had stretched for months, years. And now? He exhaled slowly. Next to him stood Deborah, her hands tucked gently in front of her. No pretense, no need for applause. Just presence. She didn't smile for the cameras. She didn't scan the crowd for press. She just watched John, like she always did, with steady eyes and quiet trust. And in that moment, John wasn't the man who had been betrayed, or humiliated, or erased. He was the man who had rebuilt. He leaned toward the mic. I remember sitting in a boardroom a few years ago, he said, voice calm. I had just signed a funding agreement, or I thought I had. The audience shifted, curious. I lost more than a deal that day. I lost people, I lost identity. I even lost language for a while. I didn't know how to speak without flinching. He paused. But I learned. Deborah's gaze never wavered. I didn't leave to take revenge, he continued. I left to build something that couldn't be taken away. Silence, but not empty silence. Heavy, warm, like a curtain falling after the final line of a play. This platform, Origin, is about ownership, of self, of story, of legacy. He turned slightly toward Deborah, and I didn't build it alone. She nodded, only once, the kind of nod that meant everything and asked for nothing. Behind them, the screen faded to black, then lit up again, this time with photos of users who'd been early testers, people who had used Origin to walk away from toxic workplaces, to understand relationship patterns, to heal from financial trauma. Real people, with names, faces, journeys, not numbers. The crowd began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, stronger. Not the kind of applause you get for a flashy pitch, but the kind you get for finally saying what needed to be said. John stepped back from the mic. Deborah took his hand. They stood there for a moment, side by side. No fireworks, no grand finale, just truth. As the lights dimmed and the auditorium doors opened for the press to flood out, Deborah looked at him and whispered, "You okay?" John nodded. More than okay. She smiled. Then let's get back to work. And they did. Together. Far from red dresses, boardroom whispers, and vanity platforms. They returned to code, to users, to purpose. To building the kind of empire that didn't need to announce its greatness because its integrity spoke louder than headlines ever could.